Imagine you walk into a room. Maybe it's a meeting, a party, or a family gathering. You see that one person who, just last week, treated you like the most important person on earth. They laughed at your jokes. They validated your ideas. They made you feel like a king. You walk up to them expecting that same warmth. But this time, nothing. They look right through you. Their tone is flat. They give you a one-word answer and turn away to talk to someone else. You freeze. Your mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Are they mad at me? You spend the rest of the day analyzing your own behavior, desperate to get back to that high status. But you didn't do anything wrong. You are the victim of a calculated psychological weapon called intermittent reinforcement. It is the reason you can walk away from a boring relationship, but not a toxic one. It turns high-value men into anxious chasers. In the next 7 minutes, I will show you the mechanism behind this addiction and the exact behavioral shift you need to make to start commanding respect. Number 1, the variable reward system. The human brain is not wired to chase guaranteed rewards. It is wired to chase information. When a reward is predictable, the brain gets bored. It stops releasing dopamine because the outcome is known. But when a reward is unpredictable, the brain goes into hyperfocus. This is the slot machine principle. If a slot machine gave you $10 every time, you'd leave. But because it gives you nothing for 10 pulls, and then a jackpot, you sit there for hours. Real-world signal, you notice a hot and cold cycle that has no logical trigger. In a professional setting, a boss might praise your mediocre work on Tuesday, but shred your perfect presentation on Friday. In a friendship, they might invite you to a very important persona event one month, then forget to invite you to a casual dinner the next. The key signal is inconsistency. You cannot predict their reaction based on your performance. You can do everything right and get punished. You can do nothing and get rewarded. This hijacks your dopamine system. Neuroscience shows that dopamine spikes highest when the probability of reward is exactly 50%. When they are cold to you, your dopamine doesn't drop. It rises because your brain is anticipating the moment they turn hot again. You are chasing the maybe. Tactical insight. Stop trying to solve the puzzle. Most intelligent men think, if I just find the pattern, I can make them treat me well all the time. You must realize the chaos is the pattern. There is no good version waiting to be unlocked. The hot version is just bait. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I do not chase chaos. Number 2, the contrast effect. Once they have you hooked on the gambling mechanic, they use the contrast effect to distort your perception of reality. This is how they make the bare minimum look like a grand gesture. Think about when they finally give you attention after a period of neglect. Maybe after 3 days of silence, they finally ask, "How was your day?" Or after a week of being dismissive, the boss gives you a simple nod of approval. How do you react? You feel a rush of gratitude. You feel euphoric. You think, see, they do care. I was just overthinking it, but look at the reality. Asking how was your day is standard human behavior. A nod is bare minimum courtesy. Why does it feel like a winning lottery ticket? Because you have been starved. If you don't eat for 3 days, a stale piece of bread tastes like a steak dinner. Manipulators starve you of validation so that crumbs feel like a feast. They create a background of anxiety so that their presence brings relief. This creates a trauma bond, where you run towards the person hurting you because they are the only ones who can stop the pain. Tactical insight: you must recalibrate your baseline. When you feel that rush of relief from a small gesture, pause. Ask yourself, would I accept this behavior from a stranger? If a stranger ignored you for a week and then said hi, you wouldn't care. The only reason you care now is because your standards have been eroded. Status elevation. Most people stay in this cycle for years thinking it's passion. You now see it for what it is, starvation marketing. But there is one final lock on the cage. Number 3, the sunk cost prison. The final lock on the cage is the investment you've already made. Intermittent reinforcement ensures you work harder for their approval than you do for anyone else's, because you have to earn it every time you feel you have invested significant labor. You catch yourself saying, "We've been through so much together. I can't just walk away after all this effort. I know they have potential. I just need to be patient." This is the sunk cost fallacy. Your brain hates to admit that the time and emotion you spent was wasted. It convinces you that if you stay just a little bit longer, it will pay off. Tactical insight, the zero balance rule. Imagine you met this person today for the first time with no history. Knowing what you know now, would you hire them? Would you date them? If the answer is no, then you are only staying to pay off a debt that will never be settled. You must be willing to walk away from the table and leave your chips behind. The pot is not going to get bigger, you are just going to lose more. Drop this in the comments. I am willing to walk away. Here is the truth about power. Power belongs to the person who does not need the other person's reaction to feel whole. Intermittent reinforcement is designed to make you need. It turns you into a beggar waiting for a coin. But now you see the mechanism. You see that the highs are artificial and the lows are calculated. The next time someone goes cold on you, don't chase, don't analyze, don't try to win them back. See it as a test of your own reality. They are pulling the lever, expecting you to dance. Stand still. When you stop reacting to the variable rewards, the machine breaks, and you become free. If this video helped you reclaim your focus, subscribe. We are building a community of men who cannot be played. Drop one final comment to seal this knowledge. I see the game. I'll see you in the next video.